Hello and welcome to Psychological Insights. Today's topic is envy, or is it jealousy? Or is there a difference between envy and jealousy? Well, supposedly there is. And to talk about that, we have Dr. Robert Hamm. He's a psychologist in West Hartford Center, and he's an expert at all things psychological. I'm Pat Kazakoff. Stay with me. Hello, Dr. Hamm.
Hi there, Pat. How you doing?
I'm good, but what is this debate? I thought that envy and jealousy were really the same thing.
Jealousy is a three-person phenomenon where you have feelings towards someone that involves a third party. So you are feeling jealous that so and so has feelings towards somebody else.
And how does envy differentiate itself?
And envy is a two-person phenomenon. I wish that I have what you have. So just the two of us. But often the two go together. I am jealous that so-and-so likes someone else more or likes them because they have something that I think maybe I'm lacking in. So now we have both jealousy and envy, and the two are, and sometimes jealousy can bring on envy, sometimes envy can bring on jealousy. So it is kind of complicated. So often the two concepts are confused, and often they do go together, but they are different.
I can understand the confusion, but where exactly does envy come from?
Well, like most of our human emotions, these are emotions that we are born with. They're innate, but they are relational. They have to do with our relationships, of course. So envy has to do with my feelings of longing to be like somebody else, or wish I had something that someone else has. There has to be a relationship. So where did these start? Well, as always, it starts with our relationship with our parents.
Aha, once again, the primary caregiver strikes again.
Well, it's a double-edged sword. It isn't just negative, it's positive emotions, but we're talking about something that's not positive. Envy is not a pleasant emotion. It's not a healthy emotion. It stands in contrast to gratitude. And so Melanie Klein, the famous psychoanalyst, was the first to propose that our feelings of envy stand in contrast to gratitude with regard to our relationships with our primary caregivers. So we feel envy with mom or a caregiver, whoever that may serve that role, is not gratifying, is not giving enough. Mom's not there when I need her to be there to feed me or give me comfort. Gratitude we feel in contrast when mom is forthcoming, when she is available. So Klein believed that this is where these emotions, relational emotions, originate. But of course, they continue in our relationships with other people as we develop.
Right. Well, so this concentration on the primary giver, which I see is a constant in Dr. Hamm's repertoire. It's always the primary giver. So how can the primary giver be conscious of that?
It's not my repertoire. This is just standard psychoanalytic theory, and I do agree with it. Yes, but I think it's innate in mothers or caregivers to be responsive to their children. It isn't necessarily always there, but when a child is responding emotionally, it's part of that relationship for the caregiver to be attuned. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Well, it answers it on a certain level. I mean, obviously, these emotions come from someplace, and obviously, the primary giver is almost the most obvious. I'm thinking of the play Oedipus Rex. You know, Freud wrote a lot about that. Could you just review that a little bit, just to give our viewing public a better example of how that envy plays itself out?
well, yeah, this is a universal phenomenon, Freud said, and it's a critical sort of rite of passage, if you will, that all children go through. And this has to do with envy and jealousy, specifically between children and their parents. Presumably, no one knows for a fact that there is such a thing as an Oedipus complex. It was speculated by Freud, but it has to do with the fact that a child has a bond with their parents, and naturally there's going to arise a feeling of rivalry with for attention and love. It's just a part of human relationships. When you have a bond with someone, that bond that person we love and loves us has a bond with someone else, there's a potential threat. And so Freud felt that it's a universal phenomenon in every family. But at some point, children have to come to a reckoning, I guess you might say, to deal with their hostile impulses. Again, this is speculative. No one is asked. Children are not going to tell you this, of course. With the hostile impulses towards their rival. So, in this case, in the traditional family, let's say it's the boy with the father for the mother's attention and love, and with that reckoning, a realization that hostility is not a really good attitude, right? To keep in the household, it's not going to work. It's not going to go well. And so, according to Freud, this is a critical reckoning to realize that in order to negotiate this sort of dilemma that the child is in, the best solution is to, instead of maintain this adversarial relationship with your same-sex parent, as in Oedipus Rex, where the Oedipus had killed his father. I think it was mistakenly, but nonetheless, was a realization after the fact, and then became involved with his mother, not realizing it was his mother. So the child realizes that instead of maintaining this adversarial relationship with his father, he instead identifies, internalizes his father's qualities.
Yeah, no, I'm listening to you, and I'm thinking how this is really age old. Pope Gregory of the 6th century, he also talked about envy as one of the deadly sins. That was the 6th century, and I guess Freud took it to another level. But it's an interesting phenomenon, and it plays itself out not just in psychological terms, but also there are theories that society encourages this kind of behavior. Talk a little bit about that.
Right. I mean, right, getting back to your comment, yeah, it is. Freud is now considered antiquated, although there are many clinicians in psychology and elsewhere that still believe in a lot of his ideas are useful in clinical practice. The Oedipus complex is a key concept in psychoanalytic thought. That said, you don't have to necessarily accept it, I don't think, in order to benefit from many of the contributions that Freud made. But so I just wanted to answer your question about what is this Oedipus complex. So envy is, when we talk about envy, we usually talk about it at a micro level. it has to do with our relationships with individuals in our lives, our family, our friends, or people we know. But there are sociologists and philosophers and even psychologists who have opined that envy plays a role in how societies are set up, and that political systems in society can also use envy as a mechanism
I think,
to
I,
exploit or to.
yeah, I think Philip Cushman wrote a book about it, that the capitalist society manufactures envy. I mean, it's a strong statement, but does it have some bearing?
I think it does. And so this Cushman came up with he wrote his book, Constructing the Self, Constructing America, published in 1995. But I came upon his writings back in 1990 in an article in American Psychologist called Why the Self is Empty, where he introduced this idea um, that capitalism, that the self, Cushman said, the empty self is historically situated. It's not something that's transcendental. It's contextualized. It's contingent on society. And our society, the self, is consumption oriented because it's here in the United States. Of course, it's based on capitalism, and so. Post World War II America, according to Cushman, is a consumer society, and so our identity has sort of developed in parallel with our political system, so that how we develop a sense of identity is through consumption. So in order to feel fulfilled, to feel that we have become all that we can be, we try to consume everything that we possibly can to make ourselves better than, to be fulfilled. And Cushman is a critic of this system because he says that ultimately it leads to a sort of a spiritual bankruptcy. The empty self, you can never, it's like a bottomless pit. You can never fill that barrel. And that's the bane of capitalism. So,
I hear a little bit of a personal opinion in your statements now, and I wanted to ask you, do you have an example of another society that doesn't encourage envy? You're talking a lot about America, and you're talking a lot about the capitalist society, but do you have an example where that does, another country where that doesn't happen?
I No, I'm not a political scientist. I couldn't tell you specifically, Pat, in answer to your question. I would assume that envy is universal. And so it's not contingent entirely by any means by our political systems.
Yeah, because capitalism is not, well, it's not everywhere, but but envy is everywhere. Could you make a case that it's not about the capitalist society encouraging envy, it's that envy encourages the capitalist society?
Yeah, well, I think, yeah, no, I certainly would agree that capitalism, if it does cause envy, contribute to it, and I think it does. You're right, I agree with that, but it certainly isn't the entire explanation by any means. As I was saying, I think it's a universal emotion, but I think that to Cushman's point, capitalism contributes to it; it exacerbates it. But that he's not the only one. So there's another scientist, a sociologist by the name of Helmut Scheck. I've never heard before until just recently reading about it, who wrote a book called Envy, A Theory of Social Behavior, which in Scheck's opinion, envy is the reason sort of the psychological basis for the development of progressive political systems in the West. Um, so he feels that he points to envy as actually a cause for these collectivist political systems such as democracy, which is a fairly new phenomenon, relatively speaking, in history, and communism, because it's envy has been a social force to level the inequities in society. So people who wish they had more, their envy towards those who have more have been addressed politically by these developments in modern history, where we have democracy. People are much more participatory rather than an autocratic, more hierarchical system or caste system, or communism, even more so.
So envy, we're talking about systems here. Envy, democracy sort of evens the playing field, and perhaps can be said it has a tendency to reduce the feeling of envy as a political system.
That's Schecht's theory. Yeah. Yeah. So his explanation for the role that envy plays in society is different than Cushman's. Cushman feels that envy is an emotion that capitalism exploits, whereas Schecht believes that envy is the sort of a force. It's a cause in society. This universal emotion of envy. We want what someone else has. That has contributed to a transformation in Western politics.
I think Schecht talks more about envy as a theory of social behavior.
Yeah, that's the title of his book. I mean, these are all theories. These are, political, sociological theories. There's no empirical research to substantiate them. Right, it's a theory. But I think that it, nonetheless, I would agree with Cushman as a good example. I think what has happened in social media, with these recent congressional hearings with Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, now called Meta, is a good example. So we know about this whistleblower, right?
Francis Hogan.
Right, Hogan. And all of these documents that she has brought to light to evidence how capitalism, the almighty buck profit, has prevailed over the concerns about the influence or the impact that Facebook has had politically and psychologically in our society, and it creates envy. It contributes to envy, and so Cushman's thesis is that it takes it one step further. So that is what sells products. The more envious you are, the more insecure, the more you try to purchase things, whether it's cosmetics or clothing or self-help books or even psychotherapy. So it's self-perpetuating. It feeds on insecurity and envy.
And I don't know. I don't know if that's going to end soon, and I just don't know if the purchases of psychotherapy or cosmetics. I think it has a future. I think those purchases have a future.
Let's hope so, because I have to pay my bills,
Yes, I was thinking of that. I didn't want to mention it, but you've mentioned it. So what do we do about all this? What, like, on a micro level, which is me, you, our relationships, what do we do to dampen down this feeling of envy, of jealousy? Because it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good to be envious. It doesn't feel good to be jealous.
No, these are, I call these the malevolent siblings of emotions. They're destructive emotions, but they are universal. It's part of, what it means to be alive. So it is inevitable. It's not just society, as I said, but it's just part of who we are. And so we have to accept first that we are all susceptible. As long as we have relationships, we're going to be susceptible to feelings of envy and jealousy.
Well, the concept of being envious and or jealous, sure, that's a universal concept, but the question is in the balance. That's where the health professional comes in. How it's all right to want, but at what level does that want become destructive? That's the problem.
Yes, if one becomes consumed by the negative aspects of that, you find yourself obsessing or hostile, adversarial, resentful, it's toxic. It makes us sick psychologically, physically, and it poisons our relationships with other people. Certainly, absolutely. Uh, so when I say that it's universal and we have to accept, that doesn't mean that we should be complacent about the fact that we have these emotions if they are affecting us deleteriously like that.
So I have one more question. It's on a very micro level.
Yeah.
Are people conscious that they're envious? Like, are they conscious that they're envious, that they're jealous, and that it's toxic to them? Do they make that conclusion, or does someone else make that conclusion for them?
Well, you use the word people. So in answer to that, that's such a broad category, people. Some people do, some people don't. The more you're aware of it, the better you are, because now you can do something. If you don't know that this is affecting you, you're going to act on it and can be very destructive.
So how can you become conscious? I would think that that's the first step, that you have to be conscious. You have to say to yourself, I am an envious person and this is causing problems in my relationships. How do you become conscious of that emotion? It's so innate.
Well, someone could bring it to your attention or through self-reflection, or some people, they see a psychologist and they don't know what's going on, that they're not feeling well, they're depressed, angry, have addictions. And it could be the psychologist or therapist that brings to the, what's underneath here that's stirring all this up. Everybody's different. Some people are more aware than others, and how we come to an awareness also, it depends on many different things. So it's a hard question to answer, even though it's a good one. But what do we do about it? So today we have mindfulness training. So learning how not to be always living in the future or living in another world. You wish life was like that. I don't have this. It's not. I wish life was over there. So learning how to be patient, and that patience and fortitude comes from learning how to feel more grateful about what you have, your blessings in life, to become more mindful of the little things in life that we overlook, that are so much more important than we give credit to, especially as we get older. Many of us, not all of us, become more aware of that, and that's a blessing.
So the first thing is mindfulness. That's the first thing, just to be mindful.
Well, it's one of the things, to become grateful and to become aware of things, either through meditation or mindfulness practice, to pay attention to the small things in life that matter. I think for some of my patients, I've helped them to reassess their values in life.
That was my next question.
Many people go through life sort of driven, what they want to achieve, want to make a certain living, certain amount of money, or support their family and all of that, but find themselves later in life not knowing how they got there, or feeling empty, or feeling that they're not happy with who they are, and they don't know why, even though they're extensively very successful. And for these people, often I ask them to take a look at their values. That maybe they've been going through life very driven and very successful, but not really paying attention to the proportion of what they value, and they're undervaluing certain aspects of their life that are really important for them to pay attention to.
What about the concept of generosity? We're ending our time, so I'm pushing forward a little bit. But what about the concept of generosity? How do you?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, so one way to as an antidote to jealousy and envy which is a more of a you're kind of sucking the life out of a relationship because you're envious. So instead, learn to feel a sense of gratitude and take a generous attitude, giving to others. And it has a way of returning. It's returned. When you give to others, most people will give you back. Not everyone, but most people give back. And also, research shows that it helps you build self-esteem. So that's a way to address if you're consumed with envy. To instead of feeling envious, start to take a different approach of being giving and generous towards others, or in general, and it helps to assuage the feeling of envy.
The last point I wanted to bring up was the concept that, with the Facebook phenomenon now, everybody's out there. It looks like everyone's going to parties every day, except
right.
you. You're the only one who's not going anywhere.
Right.
What about the phenomenon of understanding, just understanding that everyone has a story? Although you can't see it, it's there. What about being conscious of that?
Absolutely. What about it? I'm all for it. I recommend it. Yes.
It's just true. Everybody has something. You just don't know about it. They're just choosing not to share with you.
Right. I think that there is a bias. I mean, many of my patients have said to me, I feel like everybody is better off than I am. And that's just a bias that when you're suffering, it feels like everyone is out there having a great time. That's the Facebook phenomenon, I call it. And I think there's a lot of truth to it. So when we try to look at other people instead with a sense of empathy, we don't see what other people suffer from, that everybody has a story, and that we're more likely to see people putting their best face on rather than telling us, all of our sorrows.
And the other part of it is that most people aren't that interested in all your sorrows. They're just not that interested. You live with your sorrows, they live with theirs. But if you could just be conscious that everyone has something.
That's right. People don't want to share those things. They don't want to burden other people. So it's a bias that many people who are suffering, as I said, that I see in my office, feel like the other people are happy. I'm a lot worse. And I try to bring, yes, okay, you are suffering, but I want you to understand that much of the suffering you suffer from is a suffering that many people, I mean, their story might be different, but they have another story that also burdens them as well. And for some people, that makes them feel better. It helps. It's, I hate to say it, it's sort of like misery loves company, but there is something that kind of assuages that feeling of envy and inferiority or jealousy. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Hamm. This topic, envy versus jealousy, I don't think it's that difficult to overcome. Perhaps that's my bias. Like the solutions that you proposed, being generous, understanding that people have a story, reassessing your values. That's not that difficult to put into practice. So I thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the next topic, as I always do. And thank you, Dr. Hamm.
Okay, thank you.